Hey guys, thanks for stopping by to watch another video here at All I See Is W, where we talk about stocks, Bitcoin, and finance. In today's video, I'd like to give you my overall comparison between two companies that I believe have bullish potential, especially with the Bitcoin bull rally that's ongoing, and we anticipate the price of Bitcoin continuing to go up. I'll go through the overall price forecasts of Bitcoin, how high Bitcoin is likely to top out, and I will specifically compare between two companies, MicroStrategy, MSTR, and Marathon Digital, a Bitcoin mining company. Most of you are wondering, is now a good time to proxy these two stocks, or is it better to go with MicroStrategy or Mara, or alone? Should I just be holding on to Bitcoin or buying Bitcoin? I'll go through all those details and let's get started. First off, I wanted to just talk about Bitcoin. So we are looking at the overall historical trend of Bitcoin, just with the cycle of like uh, 2012 here, 2014, that 2018 bull cycle, the last bull cycle, and now with the current bull cycle. So what we saw as we look at the prior bull cycle, I mean, it got up to that FOMO intensifies signal in orange there. It didn't quite get to that maximum bubble territory. However, we did see that in the 2018 run up when it got up to like that 17,000 threshold, reaching that maximum tier red. Going back to 2014, when the price was extremely low, we saw the relative strength index just go vertical, reaching beyond that maximum bubble territory. And just with these prior resistance historical trends, it's expected, especially because the price of Bitcoin was at such a lower price in that $1 to $100 range, along with the 1,000 to $10,000 range. As we start seeing the price of Bitcoin appreciate, however, we'll start seeing less of that maximum rise. But overall, just looking at Bitcoin based on the historical trend, we saw 2013 onward getting back up where 2022 was that extreme drop off of the Bitcoin price, but it's been overall consolidating in what we see here, current state at like that, sub $95,000 range. It's around that accumulate and still cheap buy range here. So we haven't quite seen Bitcoin go beyond that still cheap hodl, is this a bubble type of range where we start seeing greed kick in. So I think people are still trying to accumulate and acquire Bitcoin, especially with the institutions, with with the ETFs. There's lots of money inflows going on right now, and that also includes countries involved trying to get a hedge with Bitcoin. But I think that as we head into 2025, we're going to see at least retesting that $120,000 range in the near term, whether that's January or February. But I think that with Bitcoin being a limited supply, demand is just going to increase, and we're going to start seeing that ramp up, getting into that yellow orange phase. And who knows, will it retest to get to that red phase? We don't know, but it's good to see that just with the overall historical trends here, we're still in that accumulation phase. Now let's take a look at details on MicroStrategy. So with that information, because we know MicroStrategy and Marathon Digital is heavily correlated with the price of Bitcoin. Of course, these companies rely on Bitcoin. Their whole business model is around Bitcoin philosophy. Is MicroStrategy going to shift towards a new paradigm? So just with the recent run up that we saw in the recent months, I mean, MicroStrategy reached like an all-time high, right? Getting up to that mid 500 range. And it was until that Citron shorting on puts, MicroStrategy has been on this slight downward trajectory, consolidating now at that current price of like, the low 300s. But does that mean that there's going to be that potential run up with and high RSI kicking in? I think that just based on this visual here is that we're in this upward channel up, and I think MSTR is defying all the odds during this bull runs, and I think that there's that potential for it to continue going up. However, how high can it continue going up? We don't know, but I think there's even forecasts for it to, reach beyond that $1,000 range. But I think this just shows one of the likely positive scenarios. However, it really depends on how far Bitcoin can break out. But let's say if or when Bitcoin gets to that $120,000 range, I think we can see that retest of 500. I don't quite think that it can get beyond this price range, but I may be incorrect. But overall, just because MSTR is overvalued. Just with the 2024 performance, I mean, MSTR was like the number one leading company with its share price appreciating over the year. I mean, at one point it got up to like 800% in gains. But I do think that because it's been dropping from the mid 500s down to 300, I think there's some level of consolidation with the descending resistance with the recent weeks of trading. I think we're going to see a potential bounce back, but just because 2024 was such a great year for MSTR, I think just from a technicals standpoint, that's the risk that you take on. Although you can argue that there's consolidation happening just recently, and it may just pop back up in the near term because of the strong fundamentals with MSTR getting into the NASDAQ 100 involved in index funds. Most people, now indirectly own Bitcoin because of passive investing using that Jack Bogle investment strategy. So I think MSTR has that potential for a breakout, although there's also risk implications to also consider. So let's take a look at just Mara Holdings. So current share price, I mean, on Friday, yesterday, it dropped even further, going down by 4%, but definitely undervalued from what we've seen with the retest. So like back in November 25, in fact, it tested like that $30 range. February it retested that, that low sub 30s, 27 range. December 2023, it got that $26 range. So I think just based on what we're seeing here, because the current price is at $18, there's anticipation from a 1 year forecast that, it can get up $23, which I think is like the lowest case scenario, average of 49%, $27, which I think is still from a conservative perspective. And as we look at a maximum potential here, $44, just based on 12 analysts offering a 1 year price forecast. So I think that there's that potential gap up with Mara. And we see here that overall, out of 14 analysts, analysts are suggesting a buy rating. And just looking at the earnings per share, yes, while we do recognize that what was reported in Q3 actual results was much lower than the performance of the estimate, which is why there's been a lot of heavy manipulation going on. But I think that Q4, because the estimate is at a lower loss, I think reported is it may just blow things out of the water. I mean, we look at Q4 2023 timeframe, it was in the positive, and just the last 2 quarters, we see that negative trajectory. But I think that the overall surprise percentage may really shock people. We look at the last 2 quarters, we saw that minus, but I think that we may start seeing a green zone here. And for those reasons, in Q4, we're going to see that run up with Mara coming up very soon. Also, just looking at revenue, right? What was reported was lower than the estimate, but I do think that in Q4, because the price of Bitcoin is going to be at a higher fair value, we're going to see a a much better reported revenue with Mara. So as a result, I think that in the near term, we can see Mara retest that $30 range, at least in Q1 of 2025, whether that's January or February. I think that it can come very quickly because the price from a technicals analysis, it's been dropping significantly. Let's take a look at Mara stock seasonality. I like looking at this just to see if we see consecutive year over year performance. So just looking at the earliest year in green was 2020. So we saw that bull cycle when it went like vertical rocket launch, right? I mean, it got up to like 1200% gain. And then the next year, I mean, it significantly underperformed compared to the 2020 year. So it didn't have that similar projection, and that's expected, but we did see a significant drop off in the 2021 year. However, even though 2021 was a much better year, because it was in the positive. As we look at 2022, it was a year where there was a huge drop off. So we didn't see that similar consecutive performance, right? 2021, yes, it did go up, but it wasn't at that level of what we saw in the prior year. 2022 was a huge year of like short selling. You see minus 90%. So even though it was up 198% in 2021, there was that 90% drop off, which basically just nets this to zero, basically, or puts you in the negative. Okay, so with 2021, 2022 being a negative year for Mara in 2022, the fact that it was such in the underperformance zone. Take a look at the consecutive year, 2023, year over year performance. It went up 590%. So I think that this is consistent with what we're seeing here as we look at 2024, an underperforming year, right? But as we look at the Mara seasonality, because 2024 was in the negative zone, as we can see here, are we going to see similar to what we saw, when we saw a negative year and then the post year it was in the positive zone? So because 2024 was in the negative zone, I'm anticipating that we're going to be in this new era here based on just the Mara stock seasonality, based on trends on an annual basis. I do think that we can possibly see ourselves in between the range of the purple and the pink here with Mara. So that's why I think there's a lot of potential in Mara. It's undervalued. I mean, what goes down will eventually go back up. I mean, when you buy low, you can potentially sell high versus buying in like at 30 or $40. So that's my overall assessment with where I think has the biggest bang for your buck when you compare Mara versus MSTR. Let's take a look at an article with MicroStrategy here where they're calling for shareholders meeting to fund more Bitcoin purchases. So Michaelsaylor, he's trying to get more and more money from investors, and his goal is to at least use the ATM, get the authorized shares from 330 million shares to 10.3 billion shares to increase that authorized shares so that basically MicroStrategy can start acquiring more Bitcoin to support the US strategic Bitcoin reserve. Michael Saylor does realize that eventually Bitcoin's going to be depleted, and at that time frame, Bitcoin price is going to be very high. So that's why I think the company's goal of purchasing an additional 42 billion worth of Bitcoin over the next 3 years. This is why he's using this strategy to increase the amount of available shares and to support the U.S. crypto framework with 81 trillion Bitcoin reserve plan. And I think this is really going to change the paradigm for how we look at the US dollar, as well as potentially devaluing gold. And what this may do is that the US government may start focusing its position to convert the assets that they have in gold and the fiat and then start acquiring Bitcoin. And where will those Bitcoins come from? I mean, MicroStrategy has a big reserve, so that's where the government incentives can come into play. And overall, just based on the amount of Bitcoins that they own, 262,000 Bitcoins worth at 43 billion. They acquired all of that based on $27 billion. So they're definitely in the positive zone right now, especially because their average purchase price is like 62,000 per Bitcoin. So I think MSTR, because they hold so much Bitcoin, that's really why they are the titan of the Bitcoin community right now, which is why their share price has gone up so much. But just similar to that chart that we saw with seasonality, right? Think of MSTR as Mara in green here. And then we see that post year significantly underperforming the current year. And what happened after that? We saw underperformance. So I do think that we should consider the historical trends that we see across various stocks and make sound decisions as we make investments. So here's an article where this is talking about how Bitcoin topped 100,000, how Mara, MicroStrategy, Coinbase stocks might close 2024. And I just wanted to just focus more on the details around MSTR and Mara. So we see here just with the recent downward price of Bitcoin, I think there's some degree of accumulation that we're seeing at the mid 95,000. So as Bitcoin reached 100,000, MSTR is expected to surge to an average price based on analyst forecasts of 529, with projections ranging from a high of 650 to a low of 312. So that's a potential 55% run up from its current price of 341. So quite bullish based on this analyst's target here. Overall, despite the positive outlook driven by Bitcoin's momentum, MicroStrategy's loss estimates for next quarter are projected at 13 cents per share, with the range between 16 cents and 10 cents. This follows a loss per share of $1.72 in the previous quarter. So one thing to consider is that MSTR has only exceeded its earnings per share estimate by 25% over the past year compared to the broader industry, which has done so 66% over time. Overall, MSTR has underperformed relative to its industry peers over the last year, and that the stock has increased significantly over the year 2024. Here, Mara needs to offset Q3 disappointment, which I did talk about, in that we did see underperformance with Q3 results. Posting an adjusted loss of like 34 cents per share, missing the analyst expectations of 26 cents per share. So Q4 is set at like a loss of like 13 cents per share, but I think that Mara may likely blow things out of the water. Analysts are forecasting, average price of $27 from a high of 42 to a low of 23. That has a potential gain of like 44%, but I do think that that's on a conservative level and that we may see even a bigger run up similar to what we've seen in the past Bitcoin bull cycle. So Mara, they do have a high HODL count. I mean, around 10% of what MSTR has, around 440,000 Bitcoin. And on top of that, they can mine Bitcoin too. Last month, they announced that they mined around over 900 Bitcoins. I think that because their hash rate has increased with energized fleet efficiencies deployed, I think that their Bitcoin at one point can get to the 1,000 Bitcoins mined per month. So that shows why Mara has a unique strategy in that, yes, one, they can acquire Bitcoin, which they did with $2 billion loan with 0% interest, and they also are mining a pile load of Bitcoin. So most of you are wondering, is Mara, is MSTR, or Bitcoin a better buy? I think that it really depends on your strategy, whether a dual position between MSTR, Mara, or hedging with Bitcoin is a strategy. I leave that up to you, but overall, if I were to put my money, biggest bang for my buck, as I look into the new year, I would put my money on Mara because they've underperformed significantly. And just based on seasonality, what we see in this year's performance would not be reflected of next year's performance. And we saw that with Mara's seasonality data. So I hope this video was valuable. If you found it valuable, please make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and I'd love to hear what your comments and questions are. Thank you.